Welcome to today's presentation. This is about supporting wellbeing across the school. It will last for about an hour and there'll be opportunities to pause the presentation as we go through so you can reflect about your own experiences and your own ideas. So I'm Alison Woods and I'm a clinical psychologist working in a high school in Suffolk. This webinar is about supporting your own wellbeing and that of your colleagues in order to be able to support the students that you care for. I'm going to take you through the learning objectives briefly and an overview of what this session will be about. This session has been put together to help you to think about ways that you can support students and your colleagues by giving some practical demonstrations and techniques you can use. It's also about emphasising how important it is to care for yourself, the importance of looking after your own well-being and being aware of when you may start to feel stressed or burnt out and exhausted, and some ideas about what you can do to help yourself. We obviously are not in a position to support and help others if we feel stressed and exhausted ourselves. So it's about caring for well-being across the whole of the school community. For heads of department, there's a separate presentation by Dr. Beth Mosey, which you will have access to as well. So it's worth thinking about that if you have responsibility for a team in the school. So what I'll do is take you through some ideas and we'll look at the learning objectives for this presentation so you can think about what you might get out of the session before we start. The lockdown and the COVID-19 pandemic has obviously affected us all, but in quite different ways. We might have been affected quite directly by it or indirectly. It might be that we know people who've become very ill with COVID. It might be that we've experienced financial difficulties. Being away from loved ones has had its impact, and maybe our children being affected by not being at school. So there are wide-ranging difficulties that have come from this period. And this webinar really is to help you think about how it might have affected you and those people around you, and what those students might need when you're back at school. Okay, so let's have a think about the learning objectives for today's session. The session will allow the opportunity for some personal reflection about the consequences of the pandemic, of the lockdown, and what individual coping strategies you may have used to get through the last few months. It's also an opportunity to think about how those coping strategies might differ from other people. It's quite important to think about those coping strategies which may be helpful and those which maybe are less helpful, and that can be a useful discussion when supporting other people. We'll also be looking at the expected or normal responses in a pandemic or disaster situation. Again, that can help to think about what a normal response might be, and that can be quite useful to people when they're feeling distressed about how they're feeling. We'll also be helping to increase knowledge around how to support someone in such uncertain and distressing times. Also providing some guidance around how to manage those conversations and interactions when a student or a colleague feels very distressed and they may present to you in that state. And that might include some techniques around calming and grounding. I'm also going to introduce concepts of emotional validation, emotional containment and normalisation. And again, these are all helpful to know when you're supporting someone who's feeling really distressed. And then we'll be having a look at some coping strategies and good self-care techniques, because again, ensuring your own well-being is key when you're supporting other people. So we'll be increasing knowledge around some of those helpful strategies. So this webinar really is in two parts. The first part of the session is really reflecting and thinking about how the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown has affected us, having some reflections on how it's affected our lives and of those around us, and just thinking about the variety or range of responses we may have had over the last few months. And that's as individuals, family members, friends, professionals, and actually as a whole school community. The second part of the session is really more practical, to think about ways to support distressed students and colleagues and ways to offer comfort and a calming and containing presence for that person. And a lot of this will be things that you do already, things that you know about. So there's also a learning objective here to increase your confidence as we go back into school to help to support those people around you. Okay, so firstly, let's have a think about maybe the positive aspects of this period of lockdown. Through discussions that I've been having and other training sessions we've had over the last few months, there were quite a few positives that people have mentioned. And I wonder which ones you've written down. Often it's around work, maybe having a slower pace for some people, not having to commute into an office, working from home for some people has been a positive thing. Also being around family more, having more time with our families, more time to pursue our hobbies, and a lot of people have been keeping fit, doing more exercise, and that's felt positive. So there are some positive aspects to the last few months, so it's worth acknowledging that. But obviously there are many, many negatives of the last few months, and some of the things that I'm sure you've heard people talking about and things that you can reflect on are really around being separated from people you care about, people that you love, particularly early on in the lockdown. Also, some people may have experienced illness or even loss of a loved one or a friend, which can be very, very distressing too. And that will obviously have a ripple effect across the family. There are also negative effects of lockdown in terms of finances for some people who haven't been able to work, maybe lost employment. And also there are difficulties for some people who are shielding, who've got underlying medical conditions, and obviously that would raise anxiety about this whole period. And I guess this exercise really is to reflect on the mixture of feelings you may have had over the last few months and recognising there may be positive and negative aspects to the last 5 months. And also to start thinking about how you've coped with those. And this will help us to think about the experiences that those around us may have had, because there's such a wide range of emotions and experiences people might have had over the last few months, and also a wide range of difficult ways of coping with those difficult situations. So we're going to have a little bit of a think about that next. Okay, so what we're going to do is have a few minutes to think about coping strategies. So I want you to pause the slide just for a few moments to note down or have a think about your preferred ways of coping over the last few months with those negative aspects of COVID and the lockdown. So I guess here I'm thinking about whether your coping strategies might be listening to music, could be engaging in sport or exercise, might be watching TV, films, might be socialising on Zoom, on Teams. There are lots of different ways you may have coped with the situation. So just spend a few moments and maybe note down what that preferred way has been. You might have a few things that you've done to cope, or there might be one main coping strategy. But just spend a few moments and pause the presentation to have a think about that. Now I want you to have a think about how those coping strategies that you've been using over the last few months may differ from those of people around you. So just be thinking a little bit about how maybe some close friends that you know or family members have also coped over the last few months. Have they used similar coping styles to you, or has it been quite different? So we all have really different ways of coping with difficult situations. And some of those coping strategies we could say are more helpful than others. Some might feel like they help in the short term, but actually long term, they don't really change anything and maybe are not that helpful in the long term. That's something we can think about, and it's also really helpful to think about coping strategies when we're supporting somebody else, such as a student or a colleague. So there are many different types of coping strategies or coping techniques that we all use from time to time. And as I said, some are probably more helpful than others. But what we do know very clearly from research is that when people have had to recover psychologically and cope from really difficult situations, such as the one that we've been in and continue to be in with the pandemic, they tend to recover much better psychologically if these three things are in place. So if they feel safe, connected and calm, if they have access to social support, physical support and emotional support, and also if they feel able to help themselves, both as individuals and helping themselves within the community they live in. So these three things are really key when we think about how to recover really well psychologically from a really difficult situation. So when we think about these three elements, the feeling safe, connected and calm, having access to social, physical and emotional support, and also enabling people to help themselves, we need to think about what we can do within the school community to support people in these ways. So the first one, feeling safe, connected and calm, what can really help people in times of distress is just being with somebody, being someone who can comfort, could be consoling and be containing of their emotions. So never underestimate how important and valuable it is just to be with someone and spend time with someone when they're feeling quite distressed. In terms of offering the social, physical and emotional support, what can be really useful there is sharing information about what the normal or expected emotions might be in such a crisis situation. That can be really helpful emotional support. And also socially, that social support is around offering comfort and time and just that presence to be with someone when they're feeling quite distressed. The physical support is more really around some of the practical things that people might need at those times. So those things might be more around keeping safe, any special equipment that you might need, such as sort of masks or PPE, those kinds of things. And particularly in disaster situations, there would be some of those physical supports that would need to be in place. And finally, in terms of helping people to help themselves, which again, I said we know is really important in recovery from a difficult situation, what can help us is if someone helps us to think about different coping strategies that are available to us and discuss what they might be. And in doing that, we're problem solving and starting to help ourselves to think, what kind of things can I do to help me in this situation as an individual, but also what can I do to help the school community to effectively cope with this current situation? That then helps people to have a sense of belonging and connection with others, which is so important when recovering from this situation. So let's spend some time thinking about how we offer comfort and compassion to others. And as I said at the beginning of the session, these would be things that you do all the time. So it's important just to be maybe more aware of them and to also start building confidence, because you may not have been in school for a while. It might have been a while since you've been working with someone quite distressed. So a lot of this really is just building back confidence a little bit. So if we start off with the first one, so connecting with others in a warm and compassionate way. So what I mean by that is how we welcome someone when they come to see us is actually quite important in terms of providing that warmth, that you're pleased to see them, that you're not shocked or upset by the fact that they're upset, and welcoming someone in to come and sit with you and to give them some calm space. And that's about that connecting with people. Modelling a sense of calm, hope and validation is really key when someone's feeling distressed. And by modelling, I mean kind of in your own behaviour and how you're acting to be doing those things yourself. So holding yourself in a calm way, being hopeful that you can help someone and you can find a way through with them is really important. And the idea of emotional validation is really crucial. So helping someone to feel understood, to feel that whatever they're feeling, whatever emotions they're having are understandable and acceptable and okay. So having someone saying, I can understand why you might feel like that, given what you're thinking or what you've been through, that can be a real comfort to people. Next, allowing people time. And I think this is really important because it's a kind of natural instinct when you're with someone who's distressed to sometimes want to fill the gaps and to fill the silence with conversation and to feel that I'm not saying anything, I need to say something. Actually, you don't need to do that. Allowing people time just to sit, to come to terms with their thoughts and feelings, to start to make sense of them, it does require some space and time. So trying to override that urge to fill the silence is really important. Take the pressure off yourself and think that any time when you may have been upset, do you want people filling every gap with conversation? Probably not. Actually having some time to feel that you can think, reflect, make sense of what you're thinking and feeling, and talk about that is really important. So again, as I said earlier, never underestimate how important it is just to be with somebody. You don't have to be filling the gaps. You don't have to be finding an answer or solving the problem. You're allowing someone some space. The next point really around finding quiet space is important, and I appreciate in schools that can be a really difficult thing to find. Wherever possible, if you can find some quiet space, that's important. Just to offer that calm, peaceful environment. The other part of this really is around emotional contagion. So by that, I mean, if someone's in very high distress and very anxious, as you will know, that could be quite contagious and can spread quite quickly. If any of us see someone really scared about something, we're worried about what's scary. Should we be scared as well? And that can happen particularly with young people in schools. So it just helps to contain that high emotion and distress if you can take that young person off somewhere to the side, somewhere quiet. The next point here, similar to the last point really, but it's really about how we act when we're with someone who's feeling quite distressed. If someone's distressed, you might find they start talking very quickly and they're very worried and everything speeds up. What can actually help someone is if you pay attention to how you're speaking and start to slow it down. Don't talk too quickly. So you're modelling, again, a calm way of being. And again, you're tuning in and helping that person to start to calm down. And you'll notice this works quite well. If you start to slow down, even if someone's actually quite angry or quite anxious, they will start to slow down too. And the next point here, listening carefully with empathy. So, empathy, that ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So by that, it's really trying to understand, really trying to understand what it feels like for them. Not saying what would I feel like, but listening, being curious about what they're saying. What does it mean to them? Why does this situation particularly upset them? Why is this thought they're having particularly powerful for them, given their situation? So it's really tuning in so you can really understand what they might be feeling in the moment. And as I said earlier, not rushing to do things, not feeling you've got to fix the problem. And I think often when people present to you feeling very anxious and wanting you to kind of help them and find the answer, it can pull us in to thinking we have to do that. But actually what can really help is this being able to sit with and be with another person, offering emotional warmth and some containment over what they're feeling. So that feeling that you're calm, you're understanding, and you can help to contain those feelings, and it's okay, and it's going to be okay. Okay, so let's have a little bit more of a think about building our rapport and connection with someone who is feeling quite distressed and upset. So the first point here is quite a useful one, I think, is ensuring that you feel calm yourself. So, if you're working in a busy school, it's quite pacey, there's lots to do. It's not always the calmest place to be. And it is important that you yourself feel calm before you're in a position to help somebody else. And some fairly simple and quick ways you can do that is using things like slow, deep breaths from your belly. So just taking some really deep, slow breaths. Just 2, 3, 4 of these can help to start to calm you down. And also placing your feet firmly flat on the floor. That can help to ground you in the present moment and just helps the body to feel calmer. So a couple of simple things you can do before you start to work with someone who's feeling quite distressed is just make sure you're feeling comfortable yourself. Okay. And that makes it much easier actually to use active listening, which is the next point. You want to be able to pay attention and to listen really carefully to what someone's telling you, and also to look at someone about how they're acting, which might give you cues about how someone is feeling. And if you feel calmer yourself, you'll be able to pay more attention and listen more effectively. And the next point, kind of an obvious point really, but make regular eye contact with the person, but you don't want to be fixing your gaze on somebody. That can be quite difficult. Another point which can help for some people, because I know that we can work with some people who find any eye contact really difficult, what I found can work really well there is to sit alongside somebody. So you can still keep that distance you need to keep, but sitting alongside rather than face to face can really help someone who finds that eye to eye contact really difficult. And again, thinking about your own posture, adopting an open and accepting posture can help to say, I'm here and I'm ready to listen. So just being careful, and it's easy to do this, being careful not to be sort of folding your arms or looking quite tense yourself, which can feel like quite a closed posture. You want to be feeling comfortable and relaxed and open to that session that you're about to have with that student. Some of the things you can try that can help people to really realise that you're listening to them is to use some summarising statements. And that can help them to make sense because it's kind of pulling together the things they've already told you. So you might say, so what I'm hearing is that you're thinking this and feeling that. Or, so in other words, it sounds like you're telling me this is the main problem for you at the moment. Am I right in that? And that can also help to reflect back what you've heard, helps them to reflect on what they've said and what the meaning might be. And it might be that someone says, now you've said it back to me, I'm not sure that's quite right. When I said there's nothing I can do to help and it's all pointless, I don't think it's that bad actually. So it can be really, really positive, really effective, just to reflect back what you've heard, and it allows the person to think with a bit more distance about what they've told you and what might be going on. And as I said previously, just acknowledging and validating feelings. Whatever they're feeling, it's acceptable. It's okay, it's normal, it's expected. So using that accepting approach is really important when building that connection. And again, don't rush. It's really easy to feel you want to sort of rush through a conversation and give some positives and some problem solving. That will come in the conversation, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But just make sure you leave some space in the conversation. Allow that young person or that colleague to gather their thoughts, to start to calm down. And it's hard to do that if someone feels bombarded with questions and conversations. So don't be afraid just to let some silence take over and have a few moments to calm. Okay, so the next slide really is about education, about those expected or normal emotional responses to a pandemic or disaster situation. This is really important when supporting somebody else because it helps people to know that there can be a wide range of emotional reactions to a situation, to a disaster, and that it's okay to have those reactions. And it can be really comforting to know that actually that what they're going through, what they're feeling is not unusual, doesn't mean they're going mad or they're losing it, which often is what people say. They feel that they shouldn't be feeling something or that no one else would feel like this. And actually educating about that wide range of emotional reactions can be really important and comforting to people when they feel distressed. It's also important to point out that distress is common in these kinds of situations, such as a pandemic or disaster, but most people will not have lasting difficulties. So we need to keep a bit of perspective with that. Lots of people might have some initial distress and some difficulties, but actually most people adapt, they get used to the situation, and I'm sure that's in your experience that you've observed other people over the last few months actually getting used to this new normal that we live in. And most people, as I said, will not have long-lasting problems. And knowing that also can be really important for people. And also we need to bear in mind that in a pandemic or disaster situation, having very strong emotions can be seen as quite adaptive and expected. So something really difficult happens, unexpected, that affects millions of people, then you'd kind of expect some strong emotion there. And if we didn't have strong emotion, we might start worrying a little bit and thinking, well, we need to sort of get up and do something here. We need to respond to it. So actually, it's quite normal to expect in the early days some strong emotions around that. And as the pandemic changes and as the different phases come in and out and the transitions, there might be some more strong emotions as people start to try and get used to the new, which might be coming back to school or going back into work. So again, knowing that's normal and that people find change difficult and transition, but ultimately most people adapt quite well, that's quite reassuring and validating. Okay, so what we're going to look at on this slide is it's from an NHS Scotland presentation around psychological first aid. So very much looking at what do people need when there's a disaster or pandemic situation. And from that, we kind of look at what the emotional responses might be to give us clues about how they might be feeling and what they might need. So what we're going to do is think about those normal or expected responses to a pandemic situation. So let's now have a think about those features of a pandemic environment. So on the left side of this table, just going to have a think about some of those features. So uncertainty is obviously a key feature in a pandemic situation. So uncertainty about the situation, about the future, about how we might be affected by COVID or not affected, how it might pan out in the future, will there be treatment, will there be a vaccination. All this obviously can then cause anxiety if we're looking at the right hand column here. So it's quite a normal emotional response when you've got a high degree of uncertainty to feel distressed and to feel anxious. There's also the perceived threat there that goes on. So being in a pandemic situation will have ongoing and quite frequent changes to the way we live our lives. We'll have losses in our lives, things that have changed that we don't want to change. And we have that continual sense of threat that something could happen to us or people around us. And again, that will lead to often feelings of anxiety and distress. And the way we cope with those kinds of situations can be quite different for different people. So you may yourself use dark humour, or you might know some people who use dark humour as a way of coping with really difficult situations. Some people don't do that. I mean, it's kind of an individual thing, but there's a range of emotions that we might expect from a situation such as a pandemic. And as I said, that degree of loss can be really significant in a pandemic situation, even just from the effects of lockdowns. So the loss of the lifestyle we had before, of work, socialising, our hobbies, things we like to do in our spare time. For quite a long time, most of those things were just not happening for most people. And a loss of relationships and contact with loved ones. Some people have lost employment or had employment changing, loss of income. So loss is a real theme, obviously, around pandemic situations. Some of those, obviously, loss could be a loss of a loved one, loss of a friend, loss of a colleague, but also could be losses in the more general sense of things we're unable to do now because of the pandemic and lockdown. And it would be expected and normal to have a number of emotions in response to loss. Key ones would be the sadness, a sense of grief and bereavement, but also potentially feeling guilty and feeling a sense of shame. So there's again quite a range of emotions, and I've certainly heard about people who feel quite guilty that they've enjoyed lockdown, they've enjoyed working from home, while other people have been in what have been quite scary environments to work in and seeing really difficult, distressing things, say in hospitals. And then that can lead to a sense of guilt for some people and even a sense of shame. They're enjoying something that other people are finding really difficult. So again, there's a wide range of expected emotions. Also, a feature of a pandemic environment is this sense of unfairness. So why is this happening now? Why is it happening to everybody? And also that sense of uncertainty can also build in connection with that. So this isn't fair. I don't even know what's going to happen. What's happened to my future? I thought this was going to happen. Now it looks like it isn't going to, and I don't know when it might happen. So this might be for people going to university, going back to work, moving house. I mean, there's any number of things that are question marks now that may not happen or have to be put on hold. And there will be ongoing changes in our lives. So again, that perception of threat, something hanging over us, not knowing how it's going to pan out, is really difficult. And those emotions we might expect there will be distress, could be anger about the unfairness. Why is this happening? It's messed up all my plans. I was planning to do this year. It's really affected me badly. Could be anger. Again, could be sadness. So a range of emotions could be felt there. And something quite important to think about in terms of pandemic environments is, because of that uncertainty and because we lack control over some of these aspects that are happening, we can really feel that loss of sense of personal control over our own lives and our own world. And that's obviously a really hard thing to deal with. And the way you might respond, or someone might respond to a loss of sense of control in those kinds of global situations, is potentially zoning out or shutting off, shutting down. So not really feeling things, trying to numb our feelings or avoid what's going on. And actually some people might actually feel a sense of pain, have quite a physical response to that situation, or feel quite stressed and anxious because they feel out of control. So again, there's that range of emotions, but we kind of need to expect that range, and that's normal for such an extreme situation as a pandemic. Okay, so that's the end of part 1 of this presentation. So please now click on part 2. Thank you.